Yeah, talking to Vojtech Ripka today. He's specialist in socialism, totalitarian regimes, and history and political science. He studied that and been in that field most or all of his career. Published a lot of articles, been involved in a lot of different projects, and specialized in this topic. And we talked about history and how it's perceived and how it's being used or not used, and why it's important to recall and record history and to use it to kind of how we to view the world today, and how in some cases history is we're trying to cancel history because it's uncomfortable. It often shows the brutality of humanity and people, and it can often be things that people find offensive and things like that. We discussed a little bit how debate or political debate and historical debate can be suppressed because of people being emotional about something that which are historical facts, and how that affects what is happening now. We talked about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and how that has, how the public opinion, let's say, and the media opinion and the mainstream corporate opinion has jumped really over to the side of supporting Ukraine. Whether that is correct or whether that's morally the right thing to do, are there some things that Ukraine has to maybe come clean on? Are we in the West, are we able to understand Russia and Putin? Have we somehow contributed to this happening by kind of pushing Russia to the edges all the time? And also, in some way, did we tell Ukraine that we're going to take care of you, we're going to let you into our unions and our defense mechanism? But then when the old boyfriend Putin showed up at the dance, then we kind of ran away. So that was an interesting talk, and interesting to get Vojtech's take on this. I mean, he lives here in the Czech Republic, so he has specialized in this region, but he's also been living in England and other places abroad, so he has a very good insight into the geopolitical situation here and how it affects us. And right now, obviously, in the Czech Republic, we have a lot of refugees, and our system has so far exploded. And what we're seeing already is a little bit of a hint towards nationalism, that people are coming out and saying, okay, well, why are we taking care of all these refugees? We can't take care of our own people, and we don't really see what the consequences of this will be. Will the war escalate? Will it become worse? Is there a good way out, or are all options out of this bad? So that was an interesting talk. So check out his pages, historylab.cz and socialismrealized.eu. The sponsors, that is Alfred Jobs, alfred.cz. That's a job portal where you can find your next job. The great thing about Alfred is that you're anonymous, so that you are basically searching without anyone knowing. It's not like a CV database where you're uploading your information. You create a profile, but that's yours. You only then become visible to the jobs that you apply for, and you can apply with one click. You can filter and set up a job board so that you see only the jobs that are interesting to you, and you don't have to browse through thousands of other jobs or hundreds of other jobs that are not relevant to you. You can see the salaries that they offer, you can read about the companies, and you can apply. And so basically, if you have a job but you're kind of thinking about moving around, then you don't want to invest the time of 2-3 hours a day looking. Alfred kind of does that job for you. And Alfred is available in the Czech Republic, that's alfred.cz, and then in Iceland, alfred.is, and then in Malta, alfred.com.mt, and also in the App Store, Alfred Jobs app. And then it's the Oat Bar in Prague, which sells healthy food made from healthy ingredients, oatmeals and skyr. And they have amazing stuff. They're always coming with something new. They have different themes based on what is in season. It's a very honest concept with no nasty, no shortcuts. Everything that they can make in-house and by hand, they do. And they make it fresh every day. Obviously, it's become very popular. It has very high ratings on all the Google and TripAdvisor and whatever rating services people are using to rate restaurants. And it's a perfect stopping place if you're traveling through Prague. A lot of people are already coming to the Old Bar as a destination to visit Prague, and it's cool. People go to the castle and the bridge, and then the Old Bar. It's a monument, and they also are available for delivery. You can download the apps on your phones here called Bolt and Volt, and then you get the food sent. Super easy to use, very reliable service, and or you just drop by on Seifertova 21 in Žižkov. Opposite that is a statue of Winston Churchill, which is interesting to see, and a park nearby called Rigrovisari that has amazing views over the city and the castle. So check out the Old Bar Prague on social media. So, Vojtech Ripka, welcome to my bunker. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. We are here. I reached out to you. You have a page or a Twitter account and a web page called Socialism Realized.
Yes, that's right. We have set up it with 3 or 4 other people some 6 years ago.
Mm. And what is that about? What's the purpose of it?
Well, there are 2 purposes actually. First and foremost, it's an online learning environment, a noble word for an online app that should allow people from outside the ex-socialist or post-socialist world to give them some pieces to reflect upon and understand the life that used to look like in Czechoslovakia, but all over the post-socialist world during the communist times. Yeah.
And is it based, because then you're involved in another project called historylab.cz, which is it based on the same philosophy that you're kind of collecting data into a database and then connecting and categorizing it, right? Or
well, actually, at our Department of Education at the Institute for the Study of Totalitarian Regimes, where I work, and
can you say this again? Studies of Totalitarian Regimes.
Yeah,
is that a big theme worldwide?
I wanted to say it in a single sentence, but and even I am sometimes doing some mistakes because the name is not really intelligible and quite hard to pronounce and so on. So it's the Institute for the Study of Totalitarian Regimes, an agency set up by the Czech government some 13 years ago. And it is here to study and do research into what has happened mostly in Czechoslovakia during the Nazi occupation and during the communist regime from 48 to 89. But actually, we more specifically are doing historical education there. And quite early on, we have found out that it doesn't really make sense to separate repression or separate some specific period of 20th century, and it's rather much more productive to get sense of the 20th century as such. So that's what we are doing. And the main philosophy, to come back to your question, what is the difference, is to empower students. The students should not be like densely lectured about something, given opinions either from historians or from the teacher, but should be given a food for thought, should be working themselves, and should be co-creating the knowledge they have, should be posing questions, should be able to like do something actively. So there are some things that remain the same. These principles remain the same throughout the time, but Socialism Realized is low threshold and doesn't have such a big ambition as HistoryLab, because HistoryLab should be some analytical space for history education of the whole 20th century for, like, well, primarily Czech kids, whereas Socialism Realized is
focused
topic
on
specific,
that topic.
and for foreigners. So the primary sources we are working with, which could also include even feature films and so on, at Socialism Realized are accustomed, tailored for people that really don't know anything and are not going to.
So that's what you
read
mean
the
by
books.
low threshold.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I was playing around with it, and it's an interesting, guys. Check that out. Socialismrealized.eu, right?
Yeah.
Because you can basically, let's say, take a theme like socialism or communism effect on family life between 1950 and 1960, and then what you get is you get articles, might get news clips, so you can kind of pick your theme and pick your time period on how the communism affected society from business to private life to education, etc., right? And see relevant information about that are not made by you, but these are gathered historical information, right?
Yes, but first thing is that it's not just about topics, it's also about perspectives. So you have to actively choose a perspective. By choosing it, it shows you through the architecture of the website that history is always, or the past is always perceived through some perspective. But by choosing it, you make it like an act of will, right? And so you may choose a perspective of the ideology or the perspective of normal kind of everyday life out of politics, or the perspective of dissidents. And then the pieces of primary sources, such as documents or pieces of art or anything, are presented with a very short introduction, really short one, and with a set of questions. What the user should do is pose these questions like to the material, not to himself or to some scholarly text, but to the material. Starting with what's happening in the film clip. What is the basic idea in the text? Who wrote it? Why? What could be the target audience? And only after that get some sense. So we are not against opinions or value-laden opinions, but first we think some work has to be done in order to have the opinion somehow grounded.
But that's because that's an interesting thing, and it also made me think when I was browsing your pages. And I've been following you on Twitter for a while, and I found this very fascinating because obviously living here in Prague, there is a very rich history. I mean, they have a museum of communism here that is very fascinating. I mean, it's a horrible story and a lot of negative stories, but it's a very kind of dominating thing here. And now with the invasion into Ukraine from Russia, it kind of it brings some flashbacks, you know. And I think, you know, I've been communicating with my family in Iceland, and my friends in Denmark and places that I've lived before, and I think that we here, or people who live here, it's much closer to them somehow, and the fact that it's Russia makes it amplifies it, and then I was thinking about, like, we tend to want to ignore often the negative history, and I see that very much on a lot of topics, that, you know, when people are removing statues and they I don't know, in Germany, if you read through Allianz history, the chapter from 1935 to 1945 is 2 pages. The rest is super big, you know, like, so people are trying to edit history somehow. Is that something that, you know, like, I don't know, that you...
Yeah, sure. I wanted to pick up on 2 things you've said. One thing is the editing, and the other is the closeness. So let me start with the closeness. Yes, that's one of the principles we try to put forward both through History Lab, but also through Socialism Realized, is to find some clues or situations and topics with which today's youth or even adults might connect to through their life experience. So that's why we're speaking about life, and we tend to use a lot of material from schools or from like intergenerational conflicts, things that are like normal part of life in Europe and United States, in English-speaking countries. And to try to show something that the users might connect to. So, well, I'm having some trouble with being on the same page with my parents, or I'm trying to get a job and there's a better paid one, but I might be quite obedient and it might not be that much fun, and I have to sacrifice something. So these are, for instance, or in school, the institution of school is a lot about power. But the power is played in a bit different way in today's United States and as it was in 1970s in Czechoslovakia. So we are trying to connect somehow, use the previous knowledge and understanding of the world of users. If you have a look at a photograph of a school in a class in 1950s, most probably will be able to get a sense of who is the teacher and who are the pupils, right?
Yeah.
So that's very banal, but it's a very good starting point because you already have made some sort of analytical step, and then you might find the differences, but also things that might be similar. So, for instance, one big topic, topics that are suppressed in public discussion or in school, things you don't speak about. There obviously are such, and
but what are these and why?
What are these today? Well, you mean today in the Czech Republic or United States?
Yeah, I think if we take, for example, here, are there any topics that would not be popular in the education system somewhere or within universities? In the US, it seems that for me that seems to have gone very radical, based on what I see. I mean, I'm not there, and it's hard to judge it from the distance. But it looks to me that there is an doctrine, or there is indoctrination, or whatever you call, going on in American universities in some extent. You know.
Well, I suppose there always is some prevailing like general doctrine, but it might not be that repressive, that closed, and I suppose, for instance, today, to give a particular example, it would be very impolite, seen as something crossing all the borders, to be for the Russian invasion into Ukraine in school. And
here.
yes, and I don't want to say that it's something that should be nurtured and given enormous space, but suppressing the idea the students have. Yeah, if you want to somehow cultivate or work with what the students bring together in the classroom, then you have to hear them, even though it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, and that applies kind of generally. but there definitely are strict limits about violence and rudeness and so on. But number of others we may not even be fully aware of when trying to think about it.
But isn't that like the because I think like I was recording here the other day, and on that episode I told the guy that was visiting me that I read Hitler's biography. There was this British historian that wrote this biography. It was a very interesting reading because it gave a very deep perspective on Germany, what caused this, how, and I mean obviously just from one person who wrote it, but he collected a lot of. And I felt when I said this that I felt, oh shit, people are going to think that I'm a Nazi because I read Hitler's biography. And first of all, most people in the world would think that that's Mein Kampf, but it's not Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf is a book that he wrote. That's not his bio. But if I would have said this 20, 30 years ago, nobody would have blinked an eye. It would just have been a normal thing. Yeah, okay, this guy is interested in history and wants to understand the world. And I'm wondering about this in terms of history in general, that we are trying somehow to ignore or falsify or not discuss certain things, and then taking other things and making them something maybe that they're not. And I think that's not science, or you know what I mean? Because if you start messing with the data and the facts and to get the outcome that you want that doesn't, I don't know, piss off anyone or offend anyone, then we're on the wrong way, right?
Definitely. You're more perhaps speaking about memory or memory history, as it is usually called. But still, I get your point and completely agree. The only thing I would add is history by like historiography. Writing of history is always some
biased,
sort of editing, choosing, and so on. And the idea of like honest research is to open at least some of the decisions you have made yourself to criticism, and also use some set of tools that are reasonable.
But is that possible in this day and age when everybody lives in a silo of social media where they familiarize themselves only with people who share the same opinions, and it's really interesting. For example, on this Twitter platform, which I've only been active there for like a year or something, and there are people there. For example, I have this one guy that is he has like 700,000 followers or something, and he's blocking people because they disagree with him, and I'm thinking like, come on, you know, be bigger than this, you know, like if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. But then when I wrote and said, listen, you shouldn't block people, you just ignore them if you disagree with them or whatever, or maybe they will say one day something that makes sense, you know. And he wrote me back and said, no, we block. And everybody jumped on me and said, no, of course you block them. And I said, that's the fastest way to doom, you know, like because then you're surrounding yourself with yes people. And then if you're saying, because you're saying, okay, I want to know history to challenge my views or to add to my understanding, and maybe it will change my view or maybe confirm it, whatever. Isn't that really difficult now when people really sit with, I know best, it's confirmed by all the people around me, and I don't want to be challenged, and I don't want to be offended?
It is. I'm not entirely sure to what extent this is something completely new brought by the social media. These echo chambers, I suppose they have been there for all the time or most of the time. But what I find kind of new about perhaps even our approach is that we tend to find the uses of history, the way history is being circulated also on social media, as a very legitimate topic for history education at schools. And to some extent, schools, even though they are not the most influential source of historical imagination, still have the unique role. Perhaps in schools, and it's some saying from Northern Ireland, we tend to look up to when it comes to pedagogy, because they have gathered a great insight in torn society with a big internal conflict, and try to think about how to put these combative people together for some history lessons.
Oh, that's interesting.
And what they are saying is, let's be honest about the possible goals. I mean, the possible goal of like changing everyone's mind based on what scholars or the primary sources are saying is impossible. But at least having an opportunity to encounter different points of view in school, both from the classmates, from the teacher, but also from history, is very valuable, and it might be the last time for some of the people to so intensely and in a structured way
have a debate, and
yeah,
which is actually an interesting thing. When you say that, because I read somewhere that 70% of Americans, for example, they don't read one book after they graduate from school, not one, their whole life, and that's for me that's crazy, because I'm always been curious, and I'm seeking information. Obviously, they can consume their information somewhere else. They might watch documentaries or I don't know, read magazines or audiobooks or something like that. But it's an interesting point that you made. I hadn't thought about it like that. That school is this platform where you're not choosing the people that you're around there. They are just there because they signed up for the same course or the same education. So you should actually rather use it than to suppress it, which I think is a little bit what's happening, that they are trying to avoid that anybody gets offended.
Yeah, we are also using the term safe but not safe space, but rather safe environment, which the scholars from the Northern Ireland or Republic of Ireland use a lot. Where you open a limited and structured space for even very controversial points of view, and try to give food for thought to contemplate upon their own views, not to have the idea of straightforwardly changing them, which even wouldn't be that democratic, I would say, or liberal.
But it's now we call anyone who wants to have that, or we found the word conspiracy theorist, that or Trumpist, or a misinformation spreader, or anti-vaxxer, or whatever. I mean, we created all these words that are kind of like having an ace up your sleeve. For every dialogue, you can just slam this on the table, and then you don't even need to talk to that person, and that person is not worthy of your time or your ideas or thoughts or anything like that. And it's why did I come with that? Because I think that with this we actually kind of create a vanilla world in a way that then can kind of sneak up on us in some way, because it's not like and we see that now with Russia invading Ukraine, it's these things can happen. And we were discussing here before we started recording. I mean, it's what, 20 years since the war ended in Yugoslavia. I mean, and then apart from this, because there have been tons of wars, and America behind all of them over the last 10, 20, 30 years, which we just accept them somehow, but they just haven't been this close to us somehow culturally and geographically. And I'm thinking, like, if we're trying to, with suppressing opinions or suppressing ideals and editing history, are we trying to kind of make ourselves actually look better than we are as humans? Are we trying to deny the fact that we are greedy, we are selfish, we want for our family before anybody else, and at the same time we are feeling guilty about, I don't know, spoiling the planet or whatever.
Perhaps, and I would add that thinking that all the cultures are the same and there's some common sense of freedom and liberalism and rule of law all around the world, only shed for a time by propaganda, would be quite inaccurate, I suppose.
Arrogant.
Arrogant as well. So applying this to today's Russia, there's a lot of discussions about collective guilt, right? To what extent are like normal Russians that are not directly a part of this verkhushka around Putin, to what extent should we blame them? And this idea of impossibility to use collective guilt is kind of nonsensical in some sense. Like all these sanctions are based on some sense of collective guilt. And to say that collective guilt is impossible, to suppress any idea is also impossible, doesn't make sense, because it's very far from the real world and even wouldn't ever work. So I would say that trying to understand Russia honestly, you cannot come to the conclusion that it's just a matter of some propaganda coming for years from the media. That there's no kind of internal sources Putin now uses. He's deceiving some of the people, but some of the people just honestly support him, and you cannot blame it on some false consciousness.
I remember actually, because I think like I mean a few things about this. I mean, as an example of so in Iceland we had a massive financial crash in 2008, and we had exposed our economy and our currency to like great dangers, and we did wrong. I mean, I'm not saying we did wrong criminally, which I think a lot of people would claim though, but I'm not convinced about that. I think that was I think when you're in trouble, emergency breaks law. Like you kind of have to you might have to cut corners to try and save things. And if these people who were trying to save it would have saved it, we would have statues of them now. We wouldn't call them criminals, but because they didn't manage them, they became the fall guys. And what was interesting then is that I think everybody can agree, okay, Iceland took too much risk, they took too much loans, they were expanding too much and buying too many businesses all around the world and blah, blah. But we then, even if the regular Joe in Iceland knew this, that we did wrong, when the British, they actually imposed the terrorist law legislation on Iceland and froze Icelandic banks and everything. And they had never used it on anyone outside of countries that I think people would typically think of as terrorist countries. But they used it on Iceland. And Danish nation was and Danish economists and politicians were very critical. Some of the Scandinavian nations didn't want to help us, didn't want to give, and Russia wanted to give us a loan, and the Faroe Islands and Poland and some countries that you never expected. Even if we knew we were wrong, just because they turned against us, those people, even if we knew we were wrong, we started hating them. And that's the thing, like, you can, like, Russia, Putin can create enemies out of us to his people. That's for sure. And I don't think that those sanctions are necessarily gonna be, if they last for a long time, which they tend to do usually when they put on. It takes ages to get them off. They're gonna turn the people against them. Like not against necessarily Putin, but actually against the rest of the world. And I think we have always somehow kept Russia on the margins. We keep them in the freezer all the time. And Joe Biden said, I think in a speech in 1999, he said something that as soon as NATO and EU starts expanding into the Baltics and closer, we will have trouble. And what are we doing? We're there, you know? So, I don't know. I mean...
Right. I'm usually quite skeptical to taking too much burden or giving too much burden on history or history education, being like the teacher for today. But when it comes to the differences, I mean, people in other cultures are very different, thinking very differently. This could be kind of sensed or sort of experienced once trying to understand people in the past. People in the past took decisions based upon what they knew and what were their values, and usually they were very different, even 40 years ago. So some tools to understand and some distance between like what we call presentism, like everything is like us and like today, is quite a useful lesson.
But I think one of the shocks around this invasion and this conflict is that, as I said, it's close to us somehow. You know, it's like we are here, like 800 kilometers from the border, and you know we have a history here in the Czech Republic with Russia, and Poland has in the Baltics, and anyone within 1,500 kilometers from Russia has a history with Russia, one way or the other. You know, but that's what happens when you have a superpower. I mean, a superpower like America has a big influence on Canada, Mexico, and Central America. But I kind of felt like the shock was for a lot of people that are here and a lot of people like in other countries that are not so close. Maybe it's like war could never happen again. War in Europe was unthinkable. But why would that be? I mean, this is apart from, you said 20 years ago Yugoslavia, right? And then, but this is the longest peaceful period in Europe forever, right? I mean, since recorded history.
Right, not to get out of your question or remark, but one thing I've heard coming as a question, both in Czech schools, but in other parts of Europe, because we are interconnected with colleagues in France, Germany, Netherlands, England, and so on, and we have had some sort of not emergency, but a meeting last week to discuss how people are coping with the invasion in history education classrooms. And one particular question caught my mind because the pupils were asking, what is the difference between the war in Syria, the refugee crisis in Syria, and Ukraine? How come, and is it right that we make differences between refugees from Syria and refugees from Ukraine? Or at least what would be the reasons why? And I think you have come up with a number of reasons why this is much more imminent and more strongly felt, at least here in Central Europe.
Yeah, but I don't know. I somehow... I feel that it's in some way an arrogant. I agree with in that way that I think we're, well, to be honest with that, I think we're just showing our real colors. We're tribal people. We kind of define ourselves from our closest wife, husband, parents, siblings, relatives, town, school, and then the layers just grow and grow, and then there are some people who are on layer 15 and we just don't give a shit about, but we don't want to say it because it makes it look bad and it makes it look inhumane. People like, I would say it because I trust that the people who know me, that I'm a good person though, but I can't give the same care to someone who is in 7 tribes away from me, but I can give a certain level of care to someone who is 3 tribes away from me. I don't know, you know, like, and I think that we have now in this age of guilt started to try to decorate ourselves with that we're superhuman, that we really, really care, but actually we're just buying ourselves some peace, because a lot of the things we're doing, if we really cared for people who are suffering in the world, we would stop buying telephones, or we would, pay more for towels in IKEA, or whatever it is that is being made. And so I think I see this, as you're saying, I see how Czech Republic, with all due respect, went from not really liking Ukrainians to loving them in just 2 days.
Yeah, sure. I would add that it's also like intellectual dishonesty. I mean, now most of the people wouldn't like to discuss to what extent and how exactly the democratic order in Ukraine looked.
Before, looks.
But with these like big ideas such as equality and democracy, a lot of dishonesty comes aboard, I would say. So these ideals of the democratic liberal order, we have to be more honest and more realistic about it, while not getting completely cynical. So some basic ideas, for instance, the American political scientist Dahl spoke rather about polyarchy. More people, changes of government, and so on. Some basic principles, Schumpeterian democracy, minimal definition of democracy, rather than the very ambitious one, which is not fulfilled anywhere actually.
But in our minds, we probably all think we live in a perfect democracy. Like most countries in the West would probably think that they do. But I think actually this COVID showed us that we don't, because there was a lot of how do you say it, big decisions made in a non-democratic way, and they were made by institutions like global institutes, like the World Health Organization, that we don't vote these people. We don't. And I see it being from a small country like Iceland, which takes pride in being part of an international organization like that. It's a big thing for us, and also for the politicians involved, because they get to go on these nice trips and they stay in nice hotels. It's a prestige thing, And if someone from Iceland would speak at a conference from the World Health, we pee our pants and we put it in the papers, So. But that organization is not elected. They adopt some policy on, let's say, I don't know, vaccinations or COVID response or something like that. And then we just adopt that without, and the justification is always we have to, because we're part of this global community. And if we want to be part of that, we have to do what they say. So I think what I realized and what I really saw now is that we have moved, the decision making is not necessarily taken by the people we elected. It's further and further away from us. So I don't think that we live in perfect democracies, in this sense,
Yeah, but it's very important to stick to some of the very basic, tenable, doable principles, then not to try to be like completely cynical, hyper-realistic, and just think about power. But also because when you think about power, Czech Republic is not making any decisions whatsoever, right?
What are they made for? I mean, is it the EU, the European Union, that makes decisions for us? I mean, like who, or do you feel that politics here are not functioning?
That would be too broad question to answer. But what I meant by not taking big decisions is that the biggest decisions are taken by bigger countries, and I actually
follow. Yeah,
I actually see you as a a good way to apply some of the will of the Czech Republic, but it's not being used that much. Rather easier for the political elite to distance themselves, which might or might not be changing right now. But for the last 8 years, it was sort of a blame game from the part of the government.
But it's interesting, like the government here has been, like we have a new government now, and I think I was a little bit skeptic of that coalition in the sense that it's just too many parties, too many things to compromise on. And I think there was someone here on my podcast who actually said that this was the worst possible outcome because it kind of leaves the previous government as the only opposition voice. So when these guys have fucked things up, the only alternative is going to be the old government. And then I looked at it. I mean, like I do know that there has been accusations of corruption and there is conflict of interest and things like that, which I think unfortunately we have in a lot of countries. But if I then really looked at, okay, so what has happened to daily life of people around me, and if I look at quality of life, travels, restaurants, availability of let's say things of a higher quality, education, actually there's a lot of stuff that has improved. And we don't know if it could have improved more or if it less, because we only know that one route that history took us, And that's, so for me, like, I felt with the previous Prime Minister here, Andrej Babis, I felt like it's very, if you're not against him, if you didn't want to piss on his head or like the stickers that people put on their cards with the pissing, then there was something wrong with you. But I don't know. I mean, somehow I felt that actually the economy here did pretty well, and so it couldn't have been all bad, Maybe he did something wrong also, but I don't think that we have actually had a politician here for a really long time that didn't, So why single this one out?
Well, I would see a number of reasons why to single him out, but
yeah, but you're local, so you see it, of course, a little bit differently than I do.
But what I see as the most important is again some modesty in thinking about what we want from democracy. And one of the basic principles I think that stands the test of time is a change in the government once every few years and complete change if it's possible. And this was complete change. So by no means I see it as, even though too many parties, perhaps even like mechanically, this would cause problems. Still, the complete, the fact of complete change is positive.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, we had a prime minister in Iceland that was 16 or 20 years, and in the last 4 years, he actually fucked up all the good stuff they had done the years before because he just got mad and like. That brings me to Putin. I mean, like people are, and there are stories about that he's terminally ill and that he's gone crazy and so on. And I wanted to talk about this collective guilt, and I often think about it like, if like so we in NATO and we in the Western Empire, we have been invading countries all around the world to change governments and to get stabilize something and to get oil flowing or whatever it is that we want, or to open a canal for ships but the real, always the real, and then we leave and things go to the same, like they don't change because the change isn't real. And so I was thinking a lot about this guilt and blaming a regular Russian. If I was to blame a regular Russian, then I would say, okay, I can blame you guys collectively for not having dealt with this internally. Because what changed France in 1789 or when was the revolution? 89, I think, yeah. That was their own that was their own people demanding change in their own society. And I now I do know that, it's cheap of me to sit here in a cozy room in Prague and say, let's go out and protest, and then they're just going to be shot or jailed. But I don't think that that a country like that will change with foreign interference necessarily. I think the change has to come from the inside. And there where I say, okay, so this is where Russian people over the last decades have failed.
It's very hard for me to completely accept such a statement. I've some 12 years ago, my friend from the institute has come into contact with the people that were protesting the invasion in 1968 at the Red Square. 8 of them at that time in 2008, he brought them here, made interviews. I helped with that a bit. And actually, most of these people that were still alive are like heroes, even for me. I mean, and they said they had no idea of changing the government at that time, or even having some substantial support from the society. But it was their like personal decision.
They were protesting in Russia.
In Russia, at the Red Square, then they were quite sure that they are going to prison for years. They were like sent to Siberia for a number of years. Most of them emigrated since then, and some of them still live. Pavel Litvinenko just got interviewed on Czech radio yesterday or the day before yesterday. So there definitely are parts of the society or individual people that are very brave and honest and are sharing the basic conception of like personal and political freedom. But I'm not sure to what extent this is widespread and to what extent the support to Putin makes him just the user of the moods in the public. He definitely has a lot of power to amplify them, but some sources are there, and such as Russian imperialism that is quite widely shared. And I have to admit, I've never been to Russia, which is even used to be even a joke that during the late state socialism or communism, saying that you have not been to Russia means that you're no one. So I admit I'm no one and I have limited understanding of the situation. That's one other thing.
But does anyone really understand Russia? I mean, and that's the thing, you know, I always felt like it's a mystery somehow to us, you know, and we never can ever foresee what they're going to do or anything like that. And when I just want to make it clear that when I talk about that collective, that potential collective guilt, I do know that there are people that protest, but I also do know that their fate is not great. You know, they end up, as you say, in the Gulag or in Siberia, or they get killed, or if you're in opposition. So it's a totalitarian regime in that sense that they punish any oppositions, but it got there somehow. Do you know what I mean? And that's what I mean is that over the years they have kind of allowed it to happen, or they haven't pushed back on it. And I'm not saying that is something that should just have happened in the last 2 months. I'm saying just they got to this point somehow, and there is either by accepting this leader or not having the common voice to go all of them against it, which I think is what is needed. If you want to change the society, you change it from the inside. You don't interfere. You don't just move 2 parts and then everything changes. It doesn't work like that, or I think so. But on understanding Russia, I somehow have a feeling that we could never somehow predict. I mean, even isn't it true that when the Germans gave up, the Russians kept going. So they celebrate the liberation of Europe a day or 2 later. So they caught like 600 extra kilometers of European territory under the...
Well, partly that was based on a treaty, but the treaty was also like responding to some extent to what was happening in the field. That's right. But
because they met Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt met 2-3 months before they knew they were gonna win, and then they said, okay, so we're gonna take the final positions of the tanks or something like, and then the Russians said, no, we didn't get the facts from the Germans, so we just kept going, and no one saw that coming.
Well, that's kind of a slap to all these social scientists and historians and local or area experts. But I suppose, being kind of one of them, I suppose it's impossible to expect real future scenarios or some real predictions. Even understanding what's happening right now or what has happened in the past is well enough. But I suppose when you're looking at what's happening now, you're also discriminating between better experts, people with greater insight, trying to get sense of to what extent the person who is speaking about Russia understands Russia. Trying to get sense of some rules for yourself to be able to get sense of what's more relevant and less relevant. So I wouldn't be so categorical as like no one understands Russia.
No, I know it's a very kind of generalized comment in a way, but I don't know. It's just, it feels that it's always been kind of wrapped into this mystical thingy somehow, and I think maybe less here, but more maybe in at least in Scandinavia and in England and so on, that we have this idea of a cold society, and you can just see how Russia is being portrayed in pop culture. Like if you see TV series, it's sunny in Washington, and then they switch to Moscow, and it's gray. Nothing has been painted, and it's rainy, and it's foggy. I mean, it must be the worst weather in the world in Moscow, like, because every fucking movie you see has this. So I think we amplify this as well, like this mystique somehow.
Sure, it's kind of romantic as well, so it sounds good.
Yeah, but I actually wanted to talk to you about kind of live anti-socialism and stuff, but I think I'm kind of put that a little bit on the back burner here, and we could get a little bit more into this with Ukraine, and you mentioned it earlier that, and I spent some time in Ukraine, and we had a company there, or two companies actually, and so I did business there. It was very interesting because it was very corrupt. It was lawless in a way, and as far as what I have heard, and I don't have anything to confirm that, but the current president that is now, or is extremely good at presenting himself and his country, and he's done a great job with that. He wasn't necessarily everyone's president, and there was a lot of accusations against him for corruption. But we have somehow, I think now it's somehow painted, the country has been painted as a ideal, or I don't know, a good country, let's say, when actually there was a lot of stuff wrong there. Is this something that you see in the, let's say, the narrative, or is it gone, or not? Is it forbidden?
Well, to some extent, I would even accept the fact that a few days after the invasion, it would be inappropriate to jump into the corruption in Ukraine. Because first things first. However, when it comes to the reactions, including the Czech reaction, though it's understandable, I suppose the gesture of making Ukraine a member of the EU anytime soon is completely irresponsible.
Mm.
And shows the distance between what is the threshold for being an EU member, what are the procedures, and what is just an empty political gesture. On the other hand,
why would someone make that empty political gesture?
well, they have made it already.
Yeah, but on what's the purpose? And because I guess Ukraine probably didn't fulfill any conditions of being approved.
Well, the reason why, I suppose it's quite straightforward to just say we stand by you, and you're kind of our world we are going to protect. But I suppose it's much more important to make more tangible steps than something that in few years, whatever the situation is going to be, would backlash.
Mm.
You have promised us the EU membership, and now you're hesitant.
Mm.
Like similar dances as with Turkey, which I suppose was never meant to really be accepted.
So is that too? Do you think like with Turkey, is that like, or in this case with Ukraine, do you think is it a short-term political game to I don't know, to achieve some goals or create something that is not really necessarily meant to be fulfilled?
I suppose so. It's a matter of emotions, and momentarily it might
They were too drunk.
look well or
They said I
decent.
love you before they actually started loving them.
Yeah.
Because that's what it feels. I told you before we started. I was very angry when this happened. I was like, I went rampant on some Facebook post and said that we should arrest the ambassador of Russia and put him under house arrest. And Putin doesn't understand anything. And I felt that we had failed Ukraine in because of what you're saying. We're inviting them to the dance, we're saying, okay, guys, we want to be NATO, you want to be European Union, and we're going to help you improve your country, and you'll be one of us. And then we come to the dance, and then an old boyfriend shows up. It's called Putin. And instead of defending that date and that girlfriend that we romantically whispered that we love, we run away. And I don't know. Maybe that's actually what's happening. And this President Zelensky has been quite critical of the West in this sense, and maybe the Ukrainian nation feels a little bit let down, right?
Well, definitely.
But you're hosting refugees in your home, right? Or in a house that you have?
Not yet. We're just discussing whether to try to not skip the queue, but help imminently, because we have registered for to host a few people, but it takes quite a long time. Well, long time. It's been 3 days that we are registered, so it's not that long. But our friends at the registration center say that it's completely jammed, and there's even a lot more supply than they could fill with the demand, processing everything with visas and social security and medical security and so on. But yeah, I suppose a lot of my friends did more tangible, concrete things, and these big proclamations, such as the one made by Joseph Borrell, sending 70 fighter jets. Well, Russia invaded Ukraine is horrible, unacceptable, but making statements that are not going to ever happen in the name of affection or emotions would backlash. Just empty saying we are with you, virtue signaling doesn't help.
No, but there's a lot of that going on now, and it's interesting for me. It seems like Putin cured COVID in 2 days. It's crazy. We went from mandatory vaccinations, and you're gonna lose your job in some countries, and we had that guy in Canada with that truckers and like crazy stuff going on, and that kind of just left the media somehow, and we all switch to this, and everybody goes into some sort of a virtue signal. I mean, there's a lot of people doing a lot of good stuff, and I'm happy to see that. I mean, a lot of collections and a lot of support in that sense, and that's great. But there are also companies that are shitty companies, shitty global companies, and they've always been shitty, and they're shitty to everyone except their shareholders, and they are pretending now to be some sort of saints. And it's an interesting spiral, actually, because I could see that, McDonald's is pulling out of, and Starbucks is pulling out, and you kind of have to, you become guilty by association somehow, because if you don't pull out of Russia now, then you're pro-Putin, and it's a very, there's nothing gray here. It's just black or white. You're either against Putin or you're with him.
Well, for today's situation, I think this is kind of appropriate. And even though you can see that the decisions, or I think that the decisions of a lot of these big companies is based on the social pressure rather than anything else. Still, I would apply some cautiousness, but before the conflict. So before the conflict, it was really a matter of a lot of thinking, strategical thinking, to what extent to try to do something with Russians in Russia, to what extent to support some of the kind of official structures, but not the highest elite. For instance, in our case, to what extent to cooperate, not only in Russia, but in Belarus with a state-run institute that does further or in-service education for history teachers. Is it okay? We have discussed that a lot, and I don't think that there's any perfect solution. And isolation was not the right way to go, but
that's the way we're today, going. We're going that way now.
Yes, but I suppose the war, the invasion, the brutality needs to get even insincere response by these companies, and even the such gestures that are not born of goodwill count.
They will still count.
Yeah.
But will those companies do the same next time that the US will invade Syria or Afghanistan or Iran or something? Do you think that, I don't know, because I mean, I guess most of those companies are owned by American money to some extent, but do you think that we would see, because this is not what we've seen before, we've never seen anything of this kind of scale like now, where companies are free willingly, I mean, it's not under embargoes or restrictions, they're actually free willingly refusing to do business. I mean, I heard stories, I haven't seen it on the news because I don't read Czech well enough, but doctors refusing to treat Russian patients and stuff like that, and it is kind of escalated into a lot of bullying of people that have nothing to do with this. But let's assume that, or hope that this conflict gets resolved and this ends in some way that is palatable or eatable for everyone involved over time, at least. Obviously not for the people who lose their lives, but it's do you think that will this change how the world reacts to armed conflicts in the future? Will we care as much when it happens in Venezuela?
I don't know.
No?
I actually have no idea. One thing that we are discussing with teachers right now, and there's a sort of gathering happening right now online with some 70 teachers. So some of the ideas my colleague brought there are sometimes the teacher is not the god to know everything, omnipotent one We are lost in the situation as well, and
you're human.
And even though there should be some expertise about things you're speaking about, history definitely does not like solve the thing. So as a historian or social scientist, I have no idea. I think there are few things that are really new here, apart from the massive sanctions. Also the coverage, the way this conflict is covered. In social media, the number of sources we are getting, and so on. So perhaps this would be a feature of some new conflict as well. Perhaps not. If it is, maybe it would make even a war in a very distant place much more imminent than they were up to now. I don't know.
Yeah, it's actually we were talking about it a little bit earlier on, like before we started recording. That what is interesting about this war is that one side seems to be very well prepared from a media perspective in terms of messaging and so on, and Putin just seems to be Putin, you know, just with his huge oversized marble tables and you know, like, yeah, he's just being him, and I think like there's a lot of stuff that has been misreported somehow, and it has been that medias have been caught out using footage from previous wars or from video games even, and some very silly things. And I don't think that they needed that. I don't think that the mainstream media actually needed such a low blow again, you know, because I think a lot of them have been under criticism for the last 2-3 years about how they cover the pandemic and what kind of voice they speak, and they adopted this trusted news network that, you know, basically censors out whatever is not part of the CDC or World Health Organization doctrine or narrative. So, but then I was thinking, well, actually maybe this is how war has always been, but now we just have people on the ground with mobile phones that can actually prove that it's not necessarily right what's being reported. Do you think this is the case, that we are actually just seeing this in a different way now because we are able to, say, debunk some of the propaganda?
To some extent, perhaps. Well, the first events that seem to be like covered live with mobile phones were the Arab Spring revolutions, right? So in that sense, it's not that new, but it definitely one has to be careful about Ukrainian official sources. It's part of a necessary war propaganda. Propaganda doesn't have to be like completely negative, untouchable thing that you always need to avoid. It's very understandable from their side, but when it comes to Putin like losing hearts, one thing I've learned in my years studying political science was that the first thing you have to ask is what is the target audience and what is the aim. So has ever Putin wanted to win our hearts?
No.
Perhaps not. So in his case, yes, he's losing, but he's not.
He was bad before.
He's not even fighting. He perhaps tries to win hearts of Russian people, which, when compared to the communist regime in Czechoslovakia, that might have been the case of 1950s and 1960s, but definitely not 70s and 80s. No one really cared about winning hearts. You didn't need the hearts.
But that's very different from the Western politicians. They're all for this. They want to be popular. They're on social media, so they get the feedback directly. They get the hate if they say the wrong thing. So they care much more about this, right? appearance?
Well, they care primarily about their constituencies. And we are not Putin's constituency. But as the so-called Western countries are much more interconnected, then your reputation elsewhere matters much more.
Yeah, that's true.
And in case of Putin, I think his bad reputation in the West might open some more hearts in Russia.
Yeah.
So, in some sense, the fact that the West is applauding and very attentive and open to what comes from the Ukrainian side might be even beneficial for Putin. I don't want to say stop listening to Nexta or other channels from relatively free channels from Ukraine or Belarus, but I think it's completely out of the wants and reach of Putin, and he's not part of this game.
But it's interesting with propaganda. I was thinking about this the other day, like why, and as you said, it's the audience that matters and the purpose of the message. And I think it's quite normal when you are the underdog that you have to create this heroic image, and you need to create those stories that inspire your people to keep fighting, and it inspires the let's say the spectators or the ones that are outside the conflict. The boyfriend that ran away from the dance. They need to see that, there is something going on here, and I think in that sense, I don't think that it's an unfair manipulation. I think it serves a purpose of defending your country and asking for help, and I think with that that's a noble purpose. Like it's not just it's not virtue signaling or to making yourself look better than you are. And as you said, because I talked about the corruption accusations on Zelensky, and he is, regardless of that, he is the president of a country that is under attack one way or the other, and it's his duty is to defend his citizens and ask, for help to defend his citizens, because that's the bad thing about war. The ones that lose are always the common people. They lose their sons and fathers and brothers and all that. Yeah, and then they lose their jobs, they lose their homes, they pay through the inflation that comes, and then the ones who make money the ones least affected are the politicians that survive, and the business people that make money of rebuilding those countries after they have been ruined. So I don't know why I said this. Do you know?
Because blaming the elite for herding.
Yeah, and I think like that's the like, because there's a lot of parts in this, and like we got into this because of the corruption accusations and that, and like in the end it's innocent people that are paying for this one way or the other, and even if you can say that there's not so much civilian casualties, blah blah blah, it doesn't change the fact that the infrastructure is being ruined. They will take years, and that's going to be tax money. It's not going to be Putin's money or some oligarch that pays for it. It's going to be the common people who pay for it. So that's the real tragedy is always going to be on that level. But it's just interesting to see how this seems to work. But on the other hand, I think, as we were talking about earlier, that we were kind of flirting with Ukraine, and then if I think about what if I put myself in the shoes of Russia, then they are in a position where their world gets smaller and smaller somehow. They get cornered in more and more. And if I would portray that on the US, if let's say it was in '62 that the missile crisis was in Cuba, that the Soviet Union was going to arm Cubans with missiles that could reach Florida or something like that. I mean, that's when missiles were shitty. Now they could go over the whole world. And everything went crazy. I think we probably never in history since the Second World War be closer to a nuclear or some sort of a real breakout. And then I was thinking, okay, so what if Canada and Mexico would join hands with Russia and say, let's create a new union with China and Canada and India and Mexico, and we're all going to be superpowers, and Brazil is on board. Yeah, we'll start by putting some missiles in Canada and Mexico. What do you think the US would do?
Well, I'm not sure whether it's that productive to think just geopolitics, because I see despite all the faults and problems, I see the system not only in here but also the way society is structured, even in Ukraine, as much more free compared to Russia. There are not that violent changes in government that has happened throughout the last number of years in Ukraine. And even though there was some blood spilled and there were oligarchs behind a lot of the public figures, maybe even including Zelensky, still at least the change of power, different like groups that were connected to these politicians and so on. So in this case, I would say these principles are supreme. And if you follow them, it's the straightforwardly geopolitical power game is a bit less important. So I would count that in and would think that has this alliance of Canada, China, and Russia ever happened? Okay.
No, but we
that would mean change in the governing system of Canada in the first place, which would be not the bigger problem, but a big problem, and the primary problem, I would.
Yeah, but I don't think that anybody that, like, I don't know, woke up on the 1st of September 1982 could have imagined that, you know, Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia would be part of the European Union and you know, because if you look at the Russian Empire from a historical point of view, it's kind of, you know, it's expanded, it's, you know, gone down and up in size and so on. And I know this is a very hypothetical thing, but the only time that the US faced any threat on it, and well, they've been attacked in 9/11, but when they faced the threat of an invasion of a foreign country, or at least they believed so. I mean, I don't know what Cuba would have done with their tiny little military and their few people, but anyway, they reacted with aggression. You know, that there was no mercy there. I mean, maybe they were just lucky they had a good president at the time, or not some cowboy, but. I feel like that Russia has been a very handy enemy somehow for a long time. We can blame them. I know that the country is corrupt. I know that they have oligarchs. I know that the biggest oligarch is Putin. I know that I know all these things, and it doesn't make them good or anything like that. But at the same time, it's really interesting to look and, like, for me, I'm not an expert, but in American politics, they blame Russia. That's Trump's fault. No, that's their fault. They made him the president, and then no, they didn't do that. They made Hillary the president, and then it's Russian disinformation about COVID, Russian this, Russian that, and it was interesting. This director Oliver Stone, he made a docu-series that is called "The Untold Histories of the United States of America," and it kind of starts at the end of the Second World War and then follows the military-industrial complex of the U.S., which basically Eisenhower talks about that you know is taking over, and let's say the underlying message in this is that America is addicted to having an enemy. They have to have an enemy because that justifies all the military, that justifies all the weapons, it justifies the foreign policies and the interventions and all that are done in the name of having an enemy, but are actually just about money and contractors and oil and whatever it is, what the value is. And I don't know, I am not justifying what Russia is doing right now, but I think we just never let them to the table somehow. We keep them and we need them to be bad.
Well, that might be their previous story, and I've read quite a similar picture from Russia a few years ago. One thing is that you might explain things, and the other is justify them, right? So one thing is whether it's something is understandable, and the other is acceptable or legitimate, right? But there definitely are many mistakes, or were many mistakes made. I would be hesitant to say that the fact that Ukraine has been made indirect promise of entering NATO would be that mistake. I'm not entirely sure about this, but what I'm definitely sure about is that speaking about Russia itself being admitted in the EU ever was a mistake, though I'm not sure to what extent people felt defeated after this came to be crappy nonsense in Russia. Keeping off the table, well, what's the right to be at the table where Europe is being divided? That's my question to you. I mean, you say of the table. I'm not entirely sure what is the table. So
no, but I mean, why not have Russia as part of EU? Why not have them part of NATO? Why not bring them closer? Why not work with them? Because I mean, to be very honest, we work with a lot of countries. I mean, we as a global community and those good nations that form these communities, we do work with a lot of nations that have corruption, they have crime, they have whatever. I mean, and we don't ask about the politics of some of the leadership in some countries. I mean, like look at the Saudi Arabia. I mean, like the US has always been close to them and
in our case, Turkey, right?
Yeah,
Turkey
exactly.
in NATO, very pragmatic move. To some extent, the whole conflict brings forward a lot of material to reassess. People that were hypercritical of Poland, current Hungary, current Turkey, maybe me included, at least when it comes to Turkey. Well, have we not had Turkey on our side right now? It might be much, much harder.
Yeah. And I don't know. I think like and I have a feeling that like they can't. Well, like if we put Russia as a black box and we can just it's Russia's fault. Russian hackers, Russian this, Russian that, Russian blah blah blah. And I'm not saying that caused this or justifies it, but it's just I feel like we've kind of been floating in this direction for quite a while, and there's a lot of, but like with everything else, there's a lot of small decisions and actions and events on the way that kind of lead you to a point where you then think, shit, how the hell did we end up here? Because that when we started here 30 years ago, we weren't going to be here, but now we are here. But and you mentioned actually like now with Orban and the guys in Poland as an example. Those are politicians and political leadership and governments that are very much criticized by let's say the European community and people that don't share their ideologies and values. And then I saw an interview with Orban. My girlfriend is actually Hungarian, so I get a lot of Orbanish at home and Hungarian news and stuff. And I saw an interview with him that he did in the US and of course on Fox News, but he probably wouldn't have been invited anywhere else. But I actually, when I listened to him, I can't say that, because he was talking about, we value family, Christianity, we want to protect those traditional values, we want to be a conservative society. Okay, what's wrong with that? You know what I mean? Like, is that does it have to be bad to want to be a conservative society? And then this kind of got me into thinking that actually I feel like in some ways a lot of countries, like you can take maybe Poland and Hungary as an example, because they're maybe the most open, Serbia probably, they actually have in some way maybe more in common with the values and the rhetoric and what's going on in Russia, in a peaceful Russia and a peaceful Ukraine, than they have with, I don't know, like Scotland or something,
I wouldn't be so sure about this, but I would be quite sure about more important sources of criticism or things to criticize in Budapest. I don't buy much of the rhetorics of Orban. He has remade himself from being very centrist, liberal.
He's gone a long journey.
Pro-Western, ordered some political marketing experts to remake him, rebrand him.
Yeah.
But what's more important is the cronyism and his personal ties, nationalizing parts of industries and giving it to his family and friends.
Yeah.
Which is not a good way of governance. Has he had any kind of rhetoric whatsoever? So that would be like my critical point towards Orban, rather than his conservative rhetorics, which part of them I don't personally like or I'm not.
And you don't have to. I mean, you don't.
But it's like their country, and I suppose that even though it looks quite grim, still there's a chance again of a change in government. There are some limits to the fairness of the elections. It's
and
very.
They're going to blame George Soros if they lose.
They're already blaming him. Giuliani and Soros, and it doesn't look too attractive. I mean, all these puppet masters behind the politics being displayed in a manner reminding you of the worst anti-Semitic caricatures, which is not nice and is kind of unacceptable. But there are levels of unacceptability and some pragmatism. And I'm quite happy that even though Hungary does not allow a transfer of weapons through their territory, and they're not donating weapons themselves. Generally, they're allies and quite reliable allies. They might be blocking some of the sanctions for a while and so on. But when it comes to like real things such as Russia owning part of the oil industry, MOL, it was very short story, ended by Orban himself.
But I think, but I think like, and maybe this, because this kind of value system and lifestyle and views of the let's say the general public, like unfortunately, we suffer a lot in this part of the world with, let's say, cheating politicians and people that use power in the wrong way. But on the other hand, I felt like during COVID, for example, here, I felt like one thing is the rules. There were rules. There were public rules, and then another thing is the enforcement. And I was really curious about it, like that. If I looked at compared that to, for example, Iceland, I mean, obviously a much smaller community, just 360,000 people or something, but I don't think that the police here managed to fine restaurants for breaking these rules more than 10-15 times during 2 years, or like it was some ridiculously small number of fines that were actually issued. It never became a big thing, whereas in Iceland they did 8 per day, and and it was headline news like there were 7 people instead of 6 at this table in this restaurant, and then the owner had to come and say, "I'm sorry, hopefully nobody dies," and it really made me think. Like, I have a feeling, and I think that's we're going to talk about socialism later, but individual freedom and kind of the freedom to be just doing my own thing is very strong here, and I was thinking, okay, is it also somehow affected by the fact that these politicians know that if they push us too far, if they start taking away this gray zone that we can kind of operate within, are they then they won't get away with stealing anymore? Do you get what I mean? That they say, okay, we better just leave the people be. I think Zweig had it, like in Zweig you had it like he as long as he just got the orders, but then he did a different thing. If you have a beer for €1, everything is fine as long as it's €2. If it goes to €2, that is a revolution.
Might be, at least to some extent, but what is quite dangerous is the unpredictability, because rules are there for
a reason,
some predictability, and you're suggesting that even though there were rules, no one really expected them to be followed.
No, it's more the enforcement, like in like a public or authoritarian enforcement. I think a lot of rules were followed just because of people's good nature or respect to other people and so on. But I also think that those who, so for example, I would happily go to a pub even if I knew it wasn't allowed, because I knew I would then be around people that would happily be in a pub. I would then just have to trust that those people wouldn't go to their grandma the day after or whatever. You know what I mean? So at the other hand, I would always go to the grocery store wearing my mask and following those rules. But I just felt like somehow, and I feel it in general. I mean, I've been stopped by the police on my car and on occasions where they should have given me a fine and they didn't. I never felt that the authority here is really trying to, and I wonder if that comes from the very top, that it's just let the people do their thing. They will use their kind of values as humans to kind of navigate. And yes, there are some rules and we use them in emergency cases, but leave them be. Then we can keep stealing.
That would be a nicer way to portray it, right? Because I suppose, or at least I see the COVID pandemic as a situation of crisis. Where some of the people might have died unnecessarily because there were not enough people abiding to rules or using their decent
common sense or decency.
Yeah. So it's definitely double-edged axe, right? And when it comes to a test, and hopefully it wouldn't come to a test of war, but when it comes to a test of health crisis, I would say that it's... I wouldn't call it with such a nice words like negotiating, as you've mentioned, like negotiating on the human level and getting around with decent.
But there is
behavior.
there is a lot of gray area here in society, and I just often think about it like, I don't know, when I went to the foreign police the first time, they said, "Oh, take a chocolate box to give to the woman," and I was like, "Why? I don't even know if she likes chocolate." But there is I don't know, and I just I always somehow felt. I mean, like the biggest wheat seller in my neighborhood in Vinorati when I lived there, he was next to the police. So he opened his bar and like out came like this stream of weed smoke. You know, everybody was stoned in there, and the police was the next door, and 3 police cars, and they didn't do anything. And I'm happy that they didn't do anything because I think for better or worse, weed is better than getting hammered and or cocaine or whatever it is that people use. So. And what I'm thinking now is these values, you know, and these political view in the sense that let the masses just get on with their things and let's not interfere too much. And I think I just took COVID maybe as an example because then it was so visible to me that okay, there are rules, but then there isn't really an enforcement of them somehow, you know, like political enforcement, and that kind of maybe brings me to what I was saying earlier. Do these politicians like Orban or the guys that have been charged here or in Poland, do they actually get away with some of the stuff they do because they actually leave the people alone? Whereas politicians like in some countries are very much kind of in your face, you know?
Might be the case. I'm not sure about these exact questions towards Poland and Hungary, but what it would be very easy to say that the crumbling communist regime from late 70s to 89 somehow, or that it's part of Czech nature from Schweik to not abide or make too much of authority. Again, I wouldn't be so sure about such big stories, and it's a very easy way to make it kind of clear and understandable.
But sometimes things have to be clear and understandable. No, but you understand my theory. I know there is a million moving parts and a lot of contributing factor, but it's such a different society. I lived in Denmark, and when the post was on strike, the tax could still send you letters. They have like a fail-safe system so that the tax can still get you. Here, I don't know. I don't even know where the tax office is, you know. And I think there are people who lived here that haven't paid taxes their whole life, you know. It's just such a difference, you know.
Yeah, very visible, and I definitely agree. Having lived for a short time in England, rules abiding is very, very different there, yeah. and my supervisor was frequent visitor to East Germany during the communist times and had a lot of friends there, and this part of Germany remains a bit different to the rest, and he had some understanding of like this Central Eastern relaxed view of authority, but also he was like German from the Germany, now living in England, and it was very nice to have him as eye-opener towards the level of tolerance towards not cheating, because I was not asking for to cheat, but even when like doing very normal things such as setting up bank account and so on. So what is acceptable and what is not? What these rules written on paper really mean in real life? My question towards this disrespect or to authority, that I agree is quite spread here, is to what extent does that increase chaos or unpredictability? Because the good thing about rules is that you know where
next. You stand and when you get punished. And I think, I mean, I totally, and connecting that to the communism, I mean, that there you never really knew the rules, so and they could punish you without rules. But a little bit back to Putin and that stuff. I mean, like, so now we are, I don't know, like 10, 12 days into this war, and it's an interesting thing that I don't know. I mean, obviously there have been more sanctions, there have been more reactions, but from a war point of view or conflict point of view, and it's just kind of seems to go on somehow, and it's not clear to me if are the Russians gaining ground or is it some stalemate or whatever. Do you see do you see out of this conflict some good solution? Like, where can this end?
Well, I see a number of bad solutions or bad resolutions, or resolutions that have some bad consequences. So, for instance, the recent initiative of the Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett coming to Ukraine, coming to Russia first, then consulting with a number of other countries, including Germany. Not very clear of not positioning him as the deal maker or the mediator, distancing himself from that, just providing information. From my point of view, very welcomed initiative at this point. But
and unexpected, I think, right?
Well, Ukraine was asking Israel to mediate for some time.
Okay.
But yeah, unexpected also because of the personality of Naftali Bennett and his relative inexperience in international politics, definitely. But I can see that selling some peace with harsh limits when it comes to sovereignty of Ukraine might create a very nasty myth of Jewish peace being imposed upon us, dictated from Moscow, brokered by
to Israel. Yeah.
Same applies, or similar thing applies to Zelensky. I suppose there are people from the EU, the politicians, having not only a supportive cause, but also putting some pressure on him now.
Give this up or accept this.
Yes, and again, this could be like Zelensky and the EU sold us in Ukraine. The other option for current Ukraine and Zelensky to have the country demolished, no one could expect real support, meaning like direct military support from the West, or could expect, but it's not reasonable. So I at least eminent. Apart from some change of regime in Russia, not really.
So, I mean, the options... so the one option is that they broker some peace. That probably means that Russia gets some of the claims that they want. Yeah. And then, another option is Russia just wins. You know, they just take whatever they want and they do whatever they want. And I guess the third option could be some sort of an escalation, that this goes outside of Ukraine, and I guess that's what nobody wants. But that would always be, I guess, a route that we would go if Russia is basically demolishing the taking over the whole country, and so it kind of has to stop where it is in a way. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, we can't really allow this to get into to become some sort of a 5-year conflict, right?
Well, again, then I would ask, what does it mean not to allow it, in practical terms? But one idea I'm attentive to, but I'm not a proponent of it, is that anyway, Putin is getting Ukraine, and that's only his first move. And if we don't move here and now, next will be Baltic states, and he would see that NATO is not
defending,
not able to do anything substantial.
And then, as you mentioned also, that there is a possibility that this gets solved from the inside in Russia, and I guess that's what the aim with the sanctions is in the end, is to harm business interest to an extent that the people that have the money go to him and say, listen, this has to stop, or you need to go, or whatever. Do you see this, or do you feel that this would be something that drags out? I mean, based on what you are seeing now, and I don't know. I think a lot of people were and saying in the media that it's going to be 10 days and then they got what they want. They can change the government, they can change the constitution and make it do you after now that this time has passed, do you see it as, do you find it more likely that it's solved in the coming days, or?
No idea. But if I have to bet, I would not think that it's going to be resolved anytime soon.
And do you think that Putin has gone mad?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what would that actually mean.
Power mad?
But in some sense, I don't think it's even productive and realistic to think about Hitler or number of other dictators as mad. There are some principles and some rationality behind what they're doing, and he might, but not necessarily. I don't see any clear signs in his political moves, and I'm not a fan of this Sovietologist looking at very small signs on photographs and analyzing these
what
videos.
it meant. Hit some Easter eggs and hidden things.
But what is clear is that we are discussing some very opaque power structure, right? Even my friends that are real experts, unlike me, on Russia, are not sure to what extent Putin has got his big group of people behind him, to what extent he is a puppet master or he is a puppet, to what extent he needs these oligarchs, to what extent
do they need him?
Yeah.
But do you think that this is possibly a shift of power from we're seeing the first steps of shift of power between or from, let's say, the Western NATO, US, Europe empire, we call it like that, towards more like Russia, China, possibly some countries in the Middle East? Because I mean, I feel like when this happened, I thought, okay, you would never play game A without having game B ready, or C or D, whatever,
There are not that many signs of a strong and sensible alliance. Sensible meaning with good foundations of Russian-Chinese alliance.
Why not?
Because China seems to be the last resort for Russia, so it would be a very uneven relationship. At least from what I'm reading about the political economy of the possible future relationship, China could dictate
Russia
a lot. And apart from that, but again, I'm not having a deep expertise.
No, and you're not here as the president of the United Nations or anything like that. We're just two guys talking.
Yeah, but still, China has a great naval power, which is not possible to really combine with the Russian manpower on the ground. So how does this?
No, but I'm thinking more about like the economic kind of activity in a sense, because I've been reading some reports about that they have reduced their dependency on the US dollar, and like we are saying now, we want green energy, we're not going to use the fossil. China doesn't care, they're just going to use whatever energy they can get. So I see like actually like from a financial or economical point of view, I think even there's an agreement now between the Russian central bank and the Chinese central bank that the Russians can actually use the yen as a currency in international trade and stuff like that. So because I mean it's not like something we can take for granted that the US is always going to be in the driving seat, like that they are always in charge and that they can kind of go around the world and do whatever they want. And I mean China with their growing economy and their middle class wanting more and Russia having all these resources and kind of having been the bully on the school disco for a long time, it's not an unthinkable thing, right?
Yeah, some sort of approachment is seen for a longer time, but what I think is key, I'm siding with those experts who point to the fact that China would be much stronger one in this relationship. So
it would be better for Russia to go to the US, be with them, than
back to the question. Not such a change because the powerful one is anyway China with or without Russia.
Yeah, exactly. And they could, I mean, they could control Russia eventually, but the sanctions and all these reactions. It's an interesting. It's one of the things that. It's put in place to break down the will of people and kind of put pressure from the inside, and of course obviously also makes it harder to finance the military and the war machine that is going on. I mean, but in the Second World War, the Germans were geniuses at finding ways around this, and they did. There's always someone willing to sell if the price is right, so they did a lot of trading through South America and Spain and Sweden. Sweden always makes money off war, and I was thinking when I went to Cuba once and I was very curious about what people said, and well, nobody wanted to say anything, and so I was trying to ask. We stayed in a lot of different private homes with people, and I was trying to understand, how does it work here, and so we finally found this taxi driver that luckily drove us like the last day for like I don't know, like 4 hours or something to the airport. So it was a lot of time. And he was explaining me that, I mean, they have been under sanctions for, I don't know, 50, 60 years probably now. And actually just for not sharing the political views of the world. No, I don't think that they pose a threat to anyone. Obviously they pose a threat maybe to their own people by being a totalitarian regime, but outwards they don't. And what this guy, I mean, obviously this is just one person saying his view, and he told me that what these sanctions have done is that it created an elite of people that can actually import stuff, and you can travel, and when you travel you can bring something worth $15,000 with you. So they bring televisions that are sold in the US for $100 and they are sold for $1,000 in Cuba, because everybody wants to make money off this, because flying out of Cuba and getting a visa is such a limited resource that pushes the price of television. So he said actually what has happened here is that the government has managed to convince us that the enemy is America, not our government, because they are imposing these restrictions on our country just for political reasons, not for or ideology reasons, and not for military or let's say threat reasons, direct threat like that. So it kind of felt like with this guy at least, he said like, okay, well they turned us against it worked the other way. And I'm thinking now with Russia, it's 50 million people. It's not like some sort of it's not like we see in American movies that there's a broken tractor and everyone is wearing great clothes. It's actually a very advanced society, and there's a lot of big cities, a lot of technology, a lot of the people there want something. They are some of the biggest buyers of BMWs. They, these are not like poor people, all of them, that can't do anything or can't afford anything. So I'm thinking, is there any risk that these sanctions will actually, I don't know, turn them against us, or that they just, okay, well, you're punishing us for something that we didn't do. We're going to support the guy. We're going to support Putin.
Partially, I suppose so. But I would say that the strata of Russian society that is buying the BMWs is relatively limited and has very different dynamics compared to
the main the majority.
The majority. And I'm not sure about what kind of dynamics is this going to create. What seems to be again written by people who understand the Russian industry and like consumer market better is that sooner rather than later a lot of things that were produced by Russia, and actually there are not that many products you can buy. If I would ask you to name
a Russian product,
a Russian product you're using, they're not that much, and it seems that even part of the industry is large part of the industry is based on imports. So the machinery to extract is being built in Russia, but using the equipment from Japan, for instance. So
it will stop the industries.
So it will stop the industries. But what kind of dynamics would that create? I'm not sure. I tend to believe that this would rather turn people against Putin, but it might be just a wishful thinking.
But now we are here sitting in the Czech Republic. We are, as I've said, I think earlier, we're 800 kilometers from the border to Ukraine, and I have been here for 13 years. You've been here for 2 years. Are you worried about this conflict, that it will escalate and that it will affect us other ways than just financially and refugees and these kind of, let's say, impacts that we already see?
Well, right now I'm worried about the maturing reaction of the Czech society. Currently, in the last week or since the outburst of the conflict, it seems very nice, very welcoming, very generous. But as you've mentioned, the Andrej Babiš, it seems that throughout last 2 or 3 days, he's already bringing the arguments of taking the resources from Czechs to Ukrainian as one of his main arguments for the political campaign to become president.
We're not supporting our own people.
Yeah. The same from ombudsman.
Who's supposed to be neutral.
Who's supposed to be defending the
human rights and
so I'm worried because if this is going to be longer, the support, as you've mentioned, 2 days before the conflict, Ukrainians were not really having a good position in Czech society, to put it nicely.
Yeah.
So this could really decay quite soon, and some sort of xenophobia, and especially if the stream of refugees is going to be more intense, which we can expect. A few 100,000 people being mostly in Prague could unfortunately become a big issue in election campaigns and upcoming political struggle, and people would turn against Ukrainians, which would be very unwelcomed, but I'm afraid about it. about the threat of military invasion. Well, perhaps more with Baltics, and I'm very.
But if they would go to the Baltics, if Russia would take Ukraine, go to the Baltics, why wouldn't they come here to the Czech Republic?
They might, and I have some belief, or I hope that NATO is relatively firm. And I'm very happy to be part of NATO. Not only now, but from the very beginning, those 20 years ago. But I see it as a threat, and it has been part of the wild rhetoric we sometimes not take as a real thing throughout the last 20 years. Even before the NATO accession, actually. But now it seems to listen to people or read people like Alexander Dugin is quite essential, because these are people putting more bluntly the plans and aspirations of Russia that are really there.
I think we touched on it before. I think it's we cannot exclude that this becomes more, and that this turns into other areas and affects us in other ways than it is doing already. And I don't know, I often feel a little bit bad when we talk about this in a way, because we are actually not really affected. Yeah, we're paying more for our fuel, and we will pay more for bread or something like that. I mean, as it is now, I mean, the real effect is the people who have to run away from their homes. It must be a horrible feeling. And I was thinking about it, just to have to take your stuff, put it in the car, or just go to the bus and say, okay, I'm going to take these 2 suitcases and the kids with me, and I have to leave the dog behind or whatever. And your whole life is gone. Like, it's not, and you never know if you're going to go back there. You never know if you can put your kids back to school in your home country. The only silver lining on this, is that we have to assume, because we need people. I mean, we've needed people not just here, but I think in Europe in general. The only silver lining is that these people are actually emigrating or running to countries that are not worse. They're not getting into worse situations in terms of social support and system and stuff like that. That's the only positive that I could point at. But it's hard to say even positive when you put yourself in those shoes, because I've thought about it, like, what if I had to wake up in the middle of the night and go down to the garage and take the car and put suitcases in and drive? It's a horrible thought.
Yeah, and that's one thing. History education might come not with a solution, but with some sort of support to also imagination of children. So studying the way immigrants were accepted or rejected, even during the so-called like wonderful years of the interwar First Republic. When it comes to refugees, it was less nice than most people think. But also the expulsion of Germans and the atrocities that were done throughout the so-called wild expulsions, not to speak about Holocaust and the Second World War. So not to like play some emotional games around it with children, but rather see these different reactions, the dynamics behind, and different motivations of different social groups and so on. And we can see from the reactions already, like few years running this History Lab, which puts quite a lot of emphasis on these topics, that it makes children think, makes them think and compare, even to the COVID crisis as well. But it usually we are not seeing like short circuits straight away.
Straight to from seeing to deciding, or emotion or an impulse. It gives you more data to kind of base your reaction on.
And it's a bit detached because you're not like feeling it. You're not in that situation right now.
Which I think is very important in today's day and age.
Yeah.
Because I think people go from experiencing to reacting very fast in general, because it's usually one click away, or you can just write asshole or whatever. But they you know, like, I know it's the biggest cliche of any historian. History repeats itself. You know, like, do you think that, like, I don't know, in 50 years from now, that we will have another Soviet Union? That they will have taken over here, and
there might be some empire with some similar principles, but
not with communism.
I'm not able to predict that, and I suppose it's not about that much about labeling. Like this is so similar to the Soviet Union that we can call it kind of Soviet Union, but as a tool of understanding. So these are the similarities, these are the differences, and then the comparison is not like making it equal, but rather is it useful to compare? Because is the tool useful? And the same applies to this totalitarian theory. Is it useful? I mean, all these battles around totalitarian theory as being a tool of the Cold War only, a very mechanical ideological tool, or a very good picture of the Soviet society. Well, from my point of view, the resolution is quite straightforward. Is it useful as a tool, or is it not? If it's not, throw it away. Choose another better tool.
Okay, so we're gonna throw that away, and let's hope that history doesn't repeat itself. In the, well, unlikely it does. There are so many moving parts and so many steps that need to be taken. But so historylabs.cz, socialismrealized.eu. Any other pages or anything else on totalitarian regimes and things that are interesting for people?
Well, there's a myriad of interesting things, but when it comes to historical thinking or historical literacy, I would definitely recommend the Stanford History Education Group. I think they're doing wonderful business both in history education, but also in civics, and their program on disinformation or media literacy called Civics Online is wonderful.
Okay, so I guess, guys, I hope you enjoyed. Check out the pages that Vojtěch has, and it's very interesting stuff, and it gives a good kind of insight into the history, obviously, and maybe you can use that to make up your mind about what you think about current matters and how things will go. So yeah, thanks for coming.
Thanks as well. It was nice to be a bit out of comfort zone of my expertise.